Hello everyone, Professor Philip Travis, and this is the Week 7 announcement for History 448, A History of Modern Russia. This week, we're going to examine the emergence of the Cold War and the period of de-Stalinization under Nikita Khrushchev, which he, of course, institutes this process of reform in the Soviet Union following the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953 and his, Nikita Khrushchev's, rise to position of leader in the Soviet Union. We're also going to look back on some bigger picture things in the Soviet Union from the Bolshevik Revolution through Stalin to the de-Stalinization period, and this particularly relates to gender and sexuality in the Soviet Union. So our reading this week, we're reading from the Service book, chapter 15 and 17, and we're reading from the Baderblom book, Life in Stalin's Soviet Union, from chapter 8, with a chapter from Amy Randall on the history of gender and sexuality in the Soviet Union. So this week, the death of Stalin, the rise of Nikita Khrushchev, the period of de-Stalinization, the Cold War, and also gender and sexuality in the Soviet Union. I've graded everyone's paper proposals, and paper proposals look pretty good, but please, I made thorough comments on your proposals. Make sure you do look at and examine my comments. Sometimes I might give examples of books you might want to look at. A lot of times I will give advice relating to how you might want to develop and craft your thesis and other items that you should be thinking about. Some of you might have received comments relating to how to better craft a narrative hook. Remember, papers like this, I want to see begin with a narrative hook, and a narrative hook is like a first-hand account from a historical source that sort of captures a part of the mood or feeling of the topic of the subject that you're writing about. So if one was writing about the Cuban Missile Crisis from the Soviet perspective, you might look for an account from Nikita Khrushchev at the height of the crisis or in events leading up to the crisis. That might be an excellent narrative hook to lead the reader into the history you're about ready to explain, to demonstrate. You might provide a setup of the atmosphere globally at that time. If you were looking at the gulags, you might find a narrative account from someone like Solzhenitsyn, for example, that sort of describes what the experience was like in the gulag and use that sort of first-hand sort of lens into the gulags as an example or as a narrative hook to draw the reader in when they're preparing to read about the Gulag Archipelago or the massive construction of gulag camps in the Soviet Union, particularly during the time of Stalin. If you were writing about contrasting things like Leninism, Marxism, and other forms of socialism, you might want a narrative hook that sort of sets up the early Bolshevik Revolution, because, of course, we know from our reading from stuff like Service, we know that Lenin actually was in opposition to many other socialists and Marxists in Russia at the time. And so if you provided a inside look at that, that might be a great way to draw the reader into your subject and sort of draw out some of the fundamental differences between utopian socialism, social democracy, Marxism, and Leninism. So some of you might need to work on developing a better narrative hook. It's the first paragraph of the paper, and it's really designed to pull the reader in to the historical subject that you will be discussing. And then in the second paragraph, you deliver your sort of argument. You deliver your point, the historical point that you will make, and that will be demonstrated with evidence throughout the paper. Remember, too, a few of you might have been in this category. Remember Chicago style. Use Chicago style. you can go online to Google and search for Chicago Manual of Style. They have a free website that has basically the examples of the most common types of notes and bibliographic entries there, books, journal articles, newspapers, these types of things. Make sure you follow that notation style. That's really important. Okay, let's get right into the factoid this week. So the factoid this week is the Warsaw Pact. Here you're looking at a map of the greater Soviet Union. So I think it's probably maybe a common misunderstanding to associate Warsaw Pact states as necessarily an inherent part of the Soviet Union. And in reality, they weren't. The Warsaw Pact states include states like Poland, Romania, East Germany, and if you're wondering what this little dot right there is, that's the divided city of Berlin, which of course in East Germany remained divided by NATO and the allies of the United States in Western Europe, and of course East Berlin associated with the Warsaw Pact, East Germany, and the Soviet Union, a divided city in the heart of East Germany and in the area of influence of the Warsaw Pact. Czechoslovakia, right here, which today, of course, is the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Hungary, right here. Bulgaria, right there. And also Albania, and of course the Soviet Union. Albania does not appear on this map. Albania is just to the south. This is Yugoslavia here, which was a non-aligned communist state led by the leader Tito during this period of time. But Yugoslavia was not part of the Warsaw Pact. It was an independent state that was it was a socialist communist state, but it sort of aligned with both the West and the Soviet Union in whichever way best sort of fit its goals in terms of international relations and diplomacy. It was what would be called a non-aligned state. And Albania would be to the south of Yugoslavia. Today, Yugoslavia, of course, is broken up into a number of different countries. The Soviet Union, of course, is the heart of the Warsaw Pact. The Soviet Union, and I'm going to get back to the Warsaw Pact in a second, the Soviet Union contains many independent countries today. Countries like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, the Baltic states, which include Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And of course, this little bit right here is part of Russia. This is Kaliningrad. And this is part of Russia today, actually. And that was formerly a part of Eastern Prussia before the wars of the 20th century, particularly the Second World War. And this was occupied by Russia in World War II, and it remains part of Russia today. But the Warsaw Pact states are not formally part of the Soviet Empire. These other states, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, for example, these states are part of the SSRs, the Soviet Socialist Republics, as are the states here. And the Soviet Union is made up of Russia and then these various SSRs, Soviet Socialist Republics. Then the states after World War II that are sort of occupied following the defeat of Nazi Germany and then sort of remain within the Soviet sphere of influence, if you will, are the Warsaw Pact states, which of course you see pictured here. And theoretically, including Albania, of course, theoretically, they were semi-independent states. Now, they're just not formally part of the SSRs of the greater Soviet Union, but they're not really independent. And we see this when we look at Khrushchev during the period of de-Stalinization, when places like Hungary, right here under Emir Nagy, or places like Poland here, when they start trying to vote to have greater government, to have greater individual freedoms and greater representation in the government, a potential move that could push them away from the Soviet bloc, you see Khrushchev responded with force. And of course, Emir Nagy would ultimately be arrested and executed, and the tanks would, of course, roll into Budapest, Hungary, infamously during this period of time. So these states of the Warsaw Pact are sort of pseudo-independent, but not really, because they're not formally part of the Soviet Empire, but their political realities are basically directed by communist parties that owe their allegiance to the Soviet Union. And in that sense, they're basically only pseudo-independent. They don't really have a great deal of ability to sort of decide to become independent and break away. Instead, they are satellite states of the Soviet Empire and the Warsaw Pact, and much of their politics and so forth is influenced by local communist parties that are connected to the greater Soviet Union in one way or another, and through them they control politics largely monopolistically. In Romania, you had a dictator, and the dictator in Romania actually controlled Romania with Stalin-like force until his overthrow in 1989. Ceausescu was the name of the dictator in Romania. So what is the Warsaw Pact? Really quick, because I'm getting a little bit long-winded here, but what is the Warsaw Pact? The Warsaw Pact was really the Soviet Union's response to NATO. So the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization by the United States and its Western European allies, which was created to create a formal alliance between the United States and the Western European states, as well as other states like Turkey, of course, to create an alliance whereby they would stand militarily and in a unified sense against any sort of aggression from the Eastern Bloc. In the 1950s, West Germany, which of course is right here, was incorporated into NATO, and in response to that, the Soviet Union drives through the creation of the Warsaw Pact, which was basically a military alliance of these Eastern Central European states here with the greater Soviet Union. Again, these states are only pseudo-independent. They're really politically under the control and direction of communist parties that are inherently linked to the Soviet Union. And when you see movements in those countries for greater freedoms, for greater representation, you see the Soviet Union under Nikita Khrushchev really crush those efforts. Particularly Hungary, Emir Nagy, Poland in the late 1950s during the responses to de-Stalinization are really perfect examples of that. So the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union's response to NATO, to West Germany, and its organization of an alliance bloc of the greater Soviet sphere in Europe to counter the Western alliance of NATO, which was led by countries like the United States, France, Britain, West Germany, Belgium, and so forth. Okay. A little bit long announcement, but hopefully it's informative and makes sense. I will see everyone in the discussion forum this week. I'll get those midterm exams graded soon, and let's have a great week.